What gives your life meaning? It's a massive question, right? And it's one we all wrestle with. Today we're diving into a book that offers one of the most powerful answers ever written, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And this isn't just some philosopher's theory. It's a guide to finding purpose that was literally forged in the most unimaginable circumstances.
So, to really get why Frankl's ideas are so powerful, we've got to start with a problem that feels, well, incredibly relevant today. You could call it the modern crisis of meaning.
And look, this isn't just some vague feeling people have. The data, it's pretty stark. Just look at this. We're seeing this shocking rise in major depression among young adults. It almost doubled in a single decade. You know, these aren't just numbers on a chart. This is a huge red flag that something fundamental is missing for a lot of people.
And that leads to this massive paradox, doesn't it? I mean, we have more freedom, more comfort, more options than pretty much any generation in history. So why do so many of us feel so lost? Well, it turns out a psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl saw this exact thing coming decades ago and even had a name for it.
He called it the existential vacuum. His whole idea was that the things that used to guide us, tradition, strong communities, even basic instincts, they were starting to fade away, leaving this empty space. It's that feeling, the one that hits you on a quiet Sunday afternoon when all the noise and busyness of the week finally stops and you're just left alone with your thoughts wondering, wait, is this it?
Okay, so if we're all feeling this modern emptiness, where on earth do we find an answer? Well, Frankl's answer comes from, and I mean this literally the last place you would ever think to look, one of the darkest, most brutal environments humans have ever created.
Yeah, see, this is what's so incredible about Frankl. He wasn't some academic writing theories from a cozy office. He was a survivor. He lived through 3 years in 4 different Nazi concentration camps. Auschwitz was one of them. He lost his wife, his parents, his brother. So it was right there, in that crucible of unimaginable suffering, that his ideas about meaning weren't just thought up, they were put to the ultimate test.
And what he found, it was just profound. He noticed that the people who were most likely to survive, they weren't always the biggest or the strongest physically. No, they were the ones who held on to a purpose, a reason to make it through one more day. Maybe it was the hope of seeing a loved one again, or maybe it was some unfinished work they felt they had to complete. That's what kept them going.
So you have to wonder, how? How did anyone psychologically endure something so completely unbearable?
While Frankl, being a psychiatrist, he observed a very specific psychological journey that almost everyone went through, and he broke it down into 3 phases. First, there was shock. Just this total disbelief where people would fantasize that they'd be saved at the last minute. Then that shock gave way to apathy, this kind of emotional death. People would build this protective shell just to get through the day-to-day horror. It was necessary to survive, but it also stripped away their humanity. And then, for the tiny few who actually made it to liberation, that 3rd phase, it was a slow, difficult, even dangerous process of learning how to feel again.
And this is the crucial part. He saw this happen again and again. The moment a prisoner gave up, the moment they lost all hope in their future, their body just seemed to follow. It was like their immune system just shut down, and they'd get sick and die almost immediately. So having a purpose, it wasn't some nice-to-have philosophical idea. It was a biological necessity. It was life or death.
So how did Frankl himself get through it? Well, this quote explains it perfectly. He managed to mentally detach himself from his own suffering. He basically became a scientist, and his own experience was his research. He was constantly telling himself, my purpose right now is to observe all of this, to study it, so that if I get out of here, I can teach others what I've learned. That gave his suffering a meaning, and that meaning is what kept him alive.
All right, so Frankl survives, and he takes these earth-shattering insights and turns them into a whole new approach to therapy, and that's what he called logotherapy. Now you have to remember, at the time, most psychology, especially Freudian psychology, was completely obsessed with your past. Frankl comes along and does something totally revolutionary. He basically said, hey, let's stop digging around in the past, let's look to the future. For him, the goal wasn't about healing old wounds, it was about finding a reason to live, a purpose that pulled you forward. And the name he gave it, logotherapy, it says it all, really. Logos is the Greek word for meaning. So the whole core idea is that our main drive in life, our fundamental motivation, isn't chasing pleasure or power. It's our search for meaning. And when that will to meaning, as he called it, gets blocked,
That's when we start to feel that emptiness, that distress. Okay, so where do we actually find this meaning? Well, Frankl was very clear that it's not some big abstract mystery. He said there are 3 very clear paths for anyone. First, you can find it in creating a work or doing a deed, your job, your art, a project you care about. Second, by experiencing something or encountering someone, basically through love, through nature, through beauty. And then there's the third path, and he argued this was the most powerful one of all. It's the attitude we choose to take towards suffering that we cannot avoid. That's where we find our ultimate freedom.
To see how this works in the real world, let's look at this really cool case study. It uses a technique Frankl developed called paradoxical intention. So there was this bookkeeper, and he had a terrible case of writer's cramp. The more he tried to control it and write neatly, the worse his hand would cramp up. It was so bad he was about to lose his job. So the logotherapist gives him this really bizarre advice. He says, okay, instead of trying to write neatly, I want you to try to write with the worst, most illegible scrawl you can possibly manage. And you won't believe what happened. The guy tries, but he can't do it. The moment he tried to make his writing messy on purpose, the cramp just disappeared. By leaning into his fear instead of fighting it, he broke that vicious cycle and took back control.
And all of this brings us to what is maybe the final and honestly the most powerful lesson from Frankl's entire philosophy. It's an idea that completely flips the script on how we think about meaning.
Yeah, this quote right here might be the single most important idea in the whole book. We walk around asking this big, heavy question, what is the meaning of life? And Frankl says, whoa, stop. You've got it completely backwards. It's not our job to question life. It's life that is questioning us every single day.
So what does that actually mean? It means that meaning isn't something you just go out and find, like you're looking for lost car keys. No, it's something you build, moment by moment. Every situation you face, a challenge at work, a friend who needs help, that's life posing a question directly to you. And you don't answer with words. You answer with your actions, with your choices.
And so, in the end, Frankl's incredible life and work leaves each of us with a very powerful, very personal challenge. So let's stop asking, what is the meaning of my life? And instead ask the real question, what is life asking of you, right here, right now?